As dawn yielded to the bruise-colored dusk of another Mississippi day, James McAllister sat alone in his motel room, the chilling hum of the air conditioning unit his only company. The battle-worn journalist, entering the evening of his life, peered into the distance through half-closed blinds. His gaze was drawn to the spectral silhouette of the Meridian graveyard, its grim geometry softened by the gauzy tendrils of the encroaching fog. James was a quiet man. He had made a habit of listening more than speaking, a trait that often lent him an air of stoic mystery. This silent demeanor, combined with a lifelong generosity that saw him prioritizing the narratives of others over his own, had served him well in his career. A smile slowly formed on his face, a rare occurrence as he recollected past assignments. It quickly faded, giving way to a deep furrow on his brow, a silent acknowledgement of the task that lay before him. His investigations had led him to quaint towns and bustling metropolises alike, but there was a certain eeriness that seemed unique to Meridian, like a dirge whispered in the wind, inviting him to a dance with shadows. What strange tales of bioweapons were concealed in the heart of this small Mississippi town? The local graveyard, looming in the darkness, held a promise of answers, or so the whispers suggested. His quiet reflections were interrupted by a knock at the door. Standing in the doorway was a slight, elderly woman bearing a tray of dinner. "Evening, Mr. McAllister," she greeted, her voice echoing the town's general warmth, though laced with a trace of inexplicable caution. He thanked her, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer, noting the way her eyes avoided meeting his when he mentioned the graveyard. His journalist's instinct read more in that glance, a hidden story perhaps, silently screaming to be heard. Over dinner, he tried to coax more about the town and its legends from her, but she deftly evaded his attempts. "You just be careful out there, Mr. McAllister," she said, standing to leave, her voice carrying a note of finality that added more to the unsaid narrative than any tale she could have spun. As the night deepened, he was drawn towards the graveyard. He could hear its siren call, whispering to him of secrets and stories, of things buried not only in the earth, but also in the minds and hearts of the townsfolk. In the quiet darkness of his room, he battled with the ghosts of his past and the specters of the present, torn between the need to understand and the terror of knowing. His mind, ever the tempest, was at war with the tranquil, almost hypnotic pull of Meridian. As sleep claimed him, he found himself standing at the threshold of a mystery that promised to challenge his perceptions of reality and possibly his very sanity. It was a dance with shadows indeed, he thought, before sleep plunged him into the blackness. He was drawn into a story that promised to be anything but simple, a tale that would tear through the veils of his trauma and courage, like the eager claws of a beast lurking just beyond the light, waiting to pounce at the first sign of weakness. Little did he know, his journey into the dark had just begun. With the dawn came an uneasy quiet, the silent requiem of a town that holds on to its secrets as tightly as it did its past. James, clutching a cup of scalding black coffee, surveyed the graveyard under the pastel colors of the early morning sky. The tombstones, bathed in a ghostly light, seemed less foreboding now, but no less mysterious. Following a simple breakfast, he stepped out into the world, the gravel crunching under his shoes as he made his way to the hallowed ground that had dominated his thoughts since his arrival. As he approached the graveyard, he could feel an unusual stillness, as if time itself held its breath in reverence for the deceased. Within the grid-like arrangement of gravestones, he discovered the symbol etched into the stone, a series of interlocking circles and lines, with a central glyph that could be described as nothing less than otherworldly. With his heart quickening with the thrill of a journalist on the scent of a story, he snapped a picture with his camera. Back in town, he noticed the way people's eyes darted, their conversations stuttering into an uneasy silence when he showed them the picture of the symbol. One elderly man, his face deeply lined with age and worry, crossed himself and scurried away, whispering what sounded suspiciously like a prayer under his breath. In the town's modest library, he found himself in conversation with the librarian, a lady named Martha. Martha was a repository of local lore and took to him with a quiet understanding that made the conversation feel more like a confessional than an interview. "Those symbols," she murmured, "haven't seen them in years. Not since—" She halted abruptly, her eyes taking on a far-off glint as she lost herself in the labyrinth of her memories. But when she returned to the present, she seemed to have locked away whatever information she was about to share. Instead, she steered their conversation towards more mundane topics: the weather, the recent county fair, anything but the haunting symbol. The sun was setting when James returned to his motel room. He sat on the edge of the bed, his mind abuzz with fragments of the day. Each reticent conversation, every wary glance, even the oppressive silence of the graveyard swirled within him, creating a storm of unease. As night descended, he was left with more questions than answers. The symbol on the graves, the reluctance of the townsfolk, the cryptic remark from Martha. It all hinted at a shadowy narrative that was far beyond what he had initially perceived. That night, sleep eluded him. The more he delved into the story, the more his mind raced. He was on the precipice of a chasm filled with secrets and silence, and he couldn't shake off the sense of dread creeping into his heart. His struggle to distinguish the shadows of his mind from the grim reality of Meridian was just beginning, and with it, the dance with shadows slipped into an even more sinister rhythm. The veil of shadows was descending, threatening to swallow him whole. The weary sun bathed Meridian in hues of gold and red as James made his way to the town's museum, his thoughts a whirlwind of unanswered questions. The elderly curator, a man named Alfred, was said to know more about the town's history than the dusty volumes on its shelves. The museum, a converted manor house, breathed of the past, its ancient woodwork groaning with stories. Alfred, with his snow-white hair and eyes reflecting the wisdom of countless sunsets, seemed a fitting custodian. "You're asking about the symbols, eh?" he asked, glancing at the picture James handed him. There was a knowing smile on his lips, the first honest reaction he had received from anyone in town. "They speak of doorways, Mr. McAllister," he began, the frailty of his voice belying the strength of his conviction. "Doorways to places we humans aren't meant to see, to dimensions that exist parallel to ours, hidden in the fabric of reality." The words hung in the air, a chilling affirmation of James's deepest fears. As Alfred spun tales of interdimensional travelers and their sinister ties to the town, the line between truth and folklore blurred. He was trapped in an unsettling narrative where his senses battled with his sanity. The echoes from the dark dimension were reverberating within him. That night, sleep was a distant memory. Shadows danced on the motel room walls, conjuring grotesque images. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing before an immense, rippling portal, monstrous entities on the other side. Their forms an affront to human comprehension, their voices whispering madness into his soul. The nightmare left him drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding like a drum against his ribcage. In the harrowing light of dawn, he could barely discern the boundary between his bipolar episodes and the terrifying reality that Alfred's tales had unveiled. The once quiet, picturesque town of Meridian now seemed to harbor a sinister pulse beneath its surface, each heartbeat echoing the dread of the dark dimension. Paranoia and isolation set in, cloaking him in their icy embrace. Every corner held potential horror, every shadow a lurking entity. He found himself hesitating at every turn, the journalist within him fighting the primal fear that threatened to consume him. But the echoes from the dark dimension grew louder, a cacophony that drowned out the voice of reason. His only respite was the thought that the culmination of his journey was at hand, and he had to muster the courage to face it. As the echoes threatened to break him, he braced himself for the dance's final, terrifying act. A leaden sky loomed over Meridian as James began what he knew would be the climax of his unnerving saga. The whispers from the dark dimension grew louder, a discordant chorus reverberating in his psyche, becoming one with the unrelenting throbs of his bipolar disorder. The normalcy of the town's morning bustle seemed like a cruel mockery of his internal chaos. His investigations had drawn the attention of the townfolk, their sidelong glances betraying their alarm. The journalist in him wanted to reassure them, to convey that he was on the verge of a solution. Yet the man in him, the one gripped by a profound terror, could offer them nothing but shared fear. Within the hallowed grounds of the graveyard, the strange symbols seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, their enigmatic design resonating with the dark forces they had conjured. With trembling hands, he traced the glyph, his skin prickling with an alien cold. Hours of research had given him an understanding of the symbols and the portal they represented. If he were to stop the impending doom, he needed to confront the entity from the dark dimension, to close the unholy gateway before it swallowed all of Meridian. An electric charge filled the air as he murmured the archaic chant Alfred had given him, each syllable carrying the weight of unspeakable dread. A shudder passed through the ground beneath him, as if the earth itself feared what was to come. From the corner of his eyes, he perceived the arrival of the interdimensional entity, its form a grotesque mosaic of non-Euclidean shapes, shifting and changing in a dance that defied human comprehension. The sight of it strummed every primal fear hardwired into his DNA, threatening to drive him into the welcoming arms of insanity. Driven by an urgency he'd never known, he finished the chant. The effect was immediate. The entity let out a sound, a terrible world-rending noise that made the air vibrate and the earth quake. Then, like a nightmarish mirage, it slowly started to recede. Exhausted and teetering on the edge of consciousness, he could only watch as the entity faded, the portal closing behind it, the malevolent energy seeping out of the symbols, leaving behind nothing but cold, inert stone. His escape from the dark dimension came at a steep price. He was a changed man, his spirit forever scarred by the horrifying truths he had witnessed. He knew he had to leave Meridian, to put distance between him and the graveyard that had become the stage for his nightmarish dance with shadows. As he sped away from Meridian under the cover of darkness, James McAllister looked into the rearview mirror, his gaze lingering on the receding silhouette of the town. His heart pounded with the echoes of the dark dimension, a cruel reminder of the reality beneath the veneer of human understanding, the spectral entities that lurk just beyond the veil. With a heavy heart, he accepted his life would forever be tainted by the monstrous shadows of the uncharted territories he had explored. He escaped the clutches of the dark dimension, forever carrying its echoes within him, his dance with shadows culminating in a symphony of terror and survival. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed our content, show your support with a like and subscribe, and stay notified by hitting the bell icon. Expect more cosmic horror from Eldritch Tales Factory, and feel free to explore our other stories. See you in the next video.